For over 100 millennia, the celestial dominion had ruled the known galaxy with an iron fist, a vast empire spanning thousands of star systems. It was a coalition of dominant alien species bound together by a singular goal: absolute control over all intelligent life. To the dominion, order was paramount, and submission was the only path to survival. The dominion was not born from war, nor was it the result of peaceful diplomacy. It had grown over centuries through a carefully constructed balance of fear, power, and indoctrination. Every world that fell under its influence was absorbed into the hierarchy, its people forced to pay tribute in the form of resources, technology, or military service. Those who complied were permitted to exist within the Dominion's strict framework. Those who resisted were erased. At its core, the Dominion was governed by the Conclave, an assembly of the most powerful species in the Empire. These elder races had long since ceased considering themselves as equals to the lesser beings they ruled over. Their fleets were unmatched, their weapons beyond comprehension, and their reach extended across entire star clusters. No civilization had ever successfully defied them and survived. Those that had tried were now nothing more than scorched wastelands, their histories forgotten, their names erased from the annals of time. The Dominion's might was built upon a system of relentless expansion. Each newly discovered species was studied, assessed, and given an ultimatum: submit and serve, or resist and perish. This process had repeated itself countless times across the galaxy, and each time, the result was the same. Until now. A new discovery. Deep within the uncharted reaches of the Veil Nebula, Dominion scouts detected something unexpected: a newly emerged interstellar civilization. Their sensors picked up the unmistakable signs of artificial satellites, orbital shipyards, and interstellar vessels venturing beyond their home system. This civilization had not yet made first contact with the greater galactic community, but their expansion was rapid, their progress undeniable. This new species, calling themselves the Targari, had evolved on a world known as Targari Prime. Unlike many other species the Dominion had encountered, the Targari did not have the appearance of a primitive race fumbling their way into space. Their advancements in technology, particularly in energy-based weaponry and artificial intelligence, had propelled them forward at an astonishing rate in just a few centuries. They had gone from a pre-industrial society to one capable of faster-than-light travel. To the Dominion, this was both a curiosity and a concern. Their doctrine dictated that such civilizations be brought under control before they became a threat. The Targari, however, were different. Their scientific advancements had outpaced what was expected of a species at their stage of development. While their military might was still nowhere near that of the Dominion, they had something that set them apart: a reputation for adaptation. This made them dangerous. The Dominion's approach. The Dominion's high command gathered in the great war chambers of Orvaxis Prime, the beating heart of their empire. A holographic display of Targari Prime hovered above the circular table. Glowing with the soft blue hue of an artificial projection. Around the table sat the ruling elite, admirals, strategists, and leaders of the most powerful species within the Dominion. "They are not yet a threat," High Chancellor Zelras stated, his voice a low growl that reverberated through the chamber. His species, the Vorik, were among the oldest in the Dominion. Massive, reptilian beings with obsidian black scales, the Vorik had long since become one of the ruling factions of the Empire. "But their growth is unnatural. If we wait too long, they may become problematic." "Agreed," said Admiral Vexen, a member of the Silari, a species known for their calculating minds and emotionless demeanor. "Their technological progression is concerning. If they continue at this rate, they could achieve parity with our lesser fleets within a century. We should act now, while they are still manageable." A murmur of approval spread through the chamber. But not all were convinced. Seated at the far end of the table was Councillor Arvek of the Xiphos, one of the few members of the Dominion's leadership who had long advocated for more strategic expansion rather than brute force. His species had joined the Dominion not by conquest, but by voluntary allegiance, bringing with them vast intelligence networks and insight into enemy psychology. "We should be careful," Arvek warned. "The Targari are unlike the others we have encountered. Their unpredictability is their greatest strength. If we miscalculate, we may create an enemy far more dangerous than we anticipate." "Fear-mongering," Zelras scoffed. "We have crushed countless rebellions. This will be no different." A final decision was made: the Dominion would send a diplomatic envoy to Targari Prime. The process was simple: present them with terms of submission, allow them to see reason, and absorb them into the Dominion's fold. If they refused, then the full force of the Dominion's military would fall upon them. To the ruling elite, this was routine. The Targari would kneel, just as all others had before them. The arrival. The sky over Arvian, the Targari capital, darkened as the Dominion's fleet entered orbit. Their vessels, monolithic and imposing, cast long shadows over the sprawling megacities below. The citizens of Targari Prime, many of whom had never seen an alien species before, watched in a mixture of awe and terror as the alien warships hovered above them like silent gods. Within hours, the Dominion's delegation landed on the surface. Their towering forms, clad in sleek, gleaming armor, radiated an air of absolute dominance. At the head of the delegation stood Ambassador Svel, a member of the Vorik and a seasoned enforcer of Dominion law. The Targari High Council awaited them within the grand halls of the Celestial Spire, the seat of their planetary government. The hall was filled with the murmurs of nervous officials and military commanders, their eyes darting between one another as they prepared to receive their uninvited guests. Svel stepped forward, his voice booming through the chamber. "Your people have entered the interstellar stage," he announced. "The Dominion extends its hand in guidance. We offer you a future within our empire. You will provide tribute, resources, technology, and warriors in exchange. You will be protected and allowed to thrive under our rule." He paused, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "But do not mistake this for an offer. It is the way of things. You will submit. Resistance is not tolerated." A heavy silence followed. The Targari Chancellor, Valancourt, met the ambassador's gaze without flinching. Unlike many leaders before him, he did not immediately respond with fear. He did not bow or offer words of compliance. Instead, he spoke calmly, his voice steady. "What if we refuse?" A chuckle rippled through the Dominion's delegation, a low, mocking sound. "Then you will cease to exist," Svel said simply. The chamber fell into hushed murmurs. The Targari leaders exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the reputation of the Dominion. They knew what resistance meant. The destruction of entire civilizations had been well documented. And yet, something stirred within them. A defiant fire. They had spent centuries building their world, carving a future out of uncertainty. They had advanced not because of conquest or submission, but because of their drive to explore, to learn, to evolve. The idea of surrendering all they had achieved to a distant empire, of giving up their sovereignty without a fight, was unbearable. The council deliberated for days, weighing their options. And when the final vote was cast, the decision was unanimous. A message was drafted. It was not written in the language of the Dominion, nor was it framed with diplomatic niceties. It was a single word, but it carried with it the unbreakable spirit of an entire world. "No." The single word, "No," echoed through the vast chambers of the Celestial Dominion's high conclave, its meaning reverberating like a tremor through the very foundations of their empire. No species had ever defied them in such a direct and absolute manner. No civilization had dared to reject their rule without attempting to negotiate or plead for mercy. And yet, the Targari had done just that. Ambassador Svel stood motionless as he read the message again, his slitted reptilian eyes narrowing in disbelief around him. His delegation murmured among themselves, their expressions shifting from amused condescension to something more resembling alarm. This was unprecedented. The Targari had not offered a counter-proposal. They had not begged for leniency. They had simply refused. His claws tightened around the data slate displaying the Targari's response. For the first time in centuries, he found himself unsure of what to do. Protocol dictated that he return to the Dominion's ruling council and relay the message, yet something in his instincts screamed that this was an insult, one that could not be ignored. He turned to the Targari High Chancellor, Valancourt, who stood before him with unyielding resolve. The Chancellor was not trembling, he was not afraid. "You misunderstand the situation," Svel said, his voice dangerously low. "This is not a matter of choice. The Dominion does not make requests, we issue orders. You would do well to reconsider." Chancellor Kor did not flinch. "The Targari people will not kneel," he said firmly. "We will not hand over our world's resources. We will not be your subjects." Svel exhaled a guttural sound that could have been a growl or a sigh of frustration. His delegation stood rigid behind him, their postures shifting from diplomatic authority to thinly veiled aggression. Then you are condemning your world to annihilation. Kor met his gaze without hesitation. If that is the price of freedom, then so be it. The return journey to Orvaxis Prime was silent. Svel sat in his private chamber aboard the Dominion's diplomatic vessel, staring out at the shifting hues of space. As the ship traversed the warp lanes, never before had he failed in his mission, never before had he been defied. The moment the vessel arrived at Orvaxis Prime, the matter was brought before the High Conclave, the ruling elite of the Dominion, composed of the Voric, Silari, Threxian, and other dominant species. Assembled within the Imperium chamber, a grand hall of black stone and glowing energy conduits, the towering figure of High Chancellor Zelrath sat at the head of the chamber, his piercing golden eyes studying the gathered council members. Svel stepped forward, presenting the Targary's response for all to see. The room fell into stunned silence. The response was so direct, so absolute, that for several moments no one spoke. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had brought entire civilizations to their knees. They had crushed rebellions and exterminated those who resisted. And now an upstart race from the fringes of the Veil Nebula had openly defied them. The murmurs grew louder, turning into outright arguments. This is unacceptable. Admiral Vexen hissed, his segmented exoskeleton shifting as he stood. They must be made an example of. If we allow this kind of defiance to go unanswered, others may follow their lead. Agreed, said General Morvek of the Threxian warlords, his massive armored frame gleaming under the chamber's dim light. We should deploy a fleet immediately, burn their cities, reduce them to ash. But not all agreed on immediate action. Councillor Arvek of the Zyphos leaned forward, his four luminous eyes narrowing as he considered the implications. We must be cautious, he said slowly. The Targari are not like the others we have conquered. They are not mindless warriors nor frail diplomats. They are adaptable. If we are not careful, this resistance could become something far worse than mere defiance. High Chancellor Zelrath raised a clawed hand, silencing the chamber. He exhaled deeply, his voice carrying an air of finality. They have made their choice, he declared. The Dominion does not tolerate defiance. If they wish to stand against us, they will face the full weight of our wrath. He turned his gaze toward Admiral Vexen. Deploy the Armada of Subjugation. The Targari will learn what it means to challenge the Dominion. The Armada of Subjugation was one of the Dominion's most feared battle groups, comprised of over 1,000 warships, each equipped with planetary bombardment arrays, tactical strike squadrons, and gravity lances. The fleet was more than enough to wipe out a planetary civilization in days. From the massive dreadnoughts to the nimble interceptors, the Armada's war engines hummed as they assembled at the Orvaxis shipyard, preparing for the jump to Targari space. The sheer scale of firepower being mobilized was unheard of for a single world. This was not just about conquest anymore. This was about sending a message. Meanwhile, on Targari Prime, the atmosphere was tense. Chancellor Valencourt stood in the central war chamber, surrounded by his top generals, scientists, and strategists. The Targari were not naive. They had known the Dominion would respond with overwhelming force. Their intelligence operatives had already confirmed the fleet's mobilization. They're coming, said General Relos Vara, a veteran of the Outer Wars and one of the most brilliant military minds of the Targari forces. And they're bringing everything. The room was filled with grim silence. Targari Prime's military was advanced, but it was outnumbered and outgunned. Against a force like the Dominion, they had no chance in a direct battle. But they didn't need to win a battle. They needed to survive. For decades, Targari scientists had been experimenting with advanced energy fields, cloaking technology, and tactical disruption devices. Though they lacked the sheer firepower of the Dominion, they had something far more dangerous: innovation. Targari engineers worked around the clock, installing planetary defense grids, deploying stealth drones, and preparing to launch electromagnetic pulse (EMP) warheads capable of disabling enemy ships mid-flight. Underground bunkers were reinforced, and evacuation plans for civilians were initiated. The Targari were preparing not for victory but for resistance. Chancellor Kor turned to his assembled leaders. The Dominion believes we will break, he said. They think they can crush us as they have done to countless others, but we are not like the others. We are not afraid of war, we are not afraid of loss, and we will never be their subjects. He looked to the holographic display of the approaching Dominion fleet. "We do not need to defeat them. We need to make them fear us." The armada of subjugation emerged from hyperspace, the night sky of Targari Prime filling with the dark silhouettes of warships. Their cannons hummed, their planetary bombardment arrays locking onto key cities, ready to obliterate any sign of resistance. The invasion had begun. And the Targari were ready. The void above Targari Prime trembled as the armada of subjugation descended upon the planet. The Dominion's fleet was massive, an unrelenting wave of warships arranged in an imposing wall of steel and fire. At its heart, the dreadnoughts loomed like celestial behemoths, each one capable of razing entire continents. Smaller destroyers, interceptors, and troop carriers swarmed around them, a galaxy-spanning war machine built for one purpose: absolute conquest. On the bridge of the Dominion's flagship, High Admiral Vexen stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his multi-segmented exoskeleton gleaming under the ship's red war lights. His 6 luminescent eyes scanned the planetary surface below, his mind already calculating the most efficient means of bringing the rebellious Targari to their knees. "This will be over quickly," one of his officers said. "They cannot hope to resist us." Vexen gave a small, amused click of his mandibles. "Let's remind them why the Dominion rules the stars." He turned to his weapons officer. "Begin planetary bombardment. Target their key infrastructure. Cut them off from each other. Isolate them. By your command, Admiral." The first bombardment strike hit the planet like the wrath of the gods. Orbital cannons unleashed massive energy lances, carving through the Targari defense platforms with terrifying precision. Shockwaves rippled across the atmosphere as entire sectors of the sky ignited, setting ablaze anything that stood in the way. On the surface, the impact was catastrophic. Cities trembled as explosions tore through their infrastructure. Communication relays, power stations, and key transport hubs were wiped out in an instant. The streets were filled with screams as the sky rained fire, reducing once thriving metropolises into ruins. But the Targari had prepared. Beneath the devastation, shield generators activated. Massive energy domes flickered to life, absorbing the relentless bombardment. Some held firm, others shattered under the sheer force of the Dominion's might. Yet, within the chaos, the Targari's defensive plan was already in motion. The Dominion expected submission. Instead, they were met with resistance. From hidden military outposts, anti-orbital cannons emerged, their barrels humming with charged plasma. Within moments, a barrage of deadly energy blasts streaked toward the sky, slamming into the approaching Dominion fleet. One cruiser was instantly engulfed in flames, its hull splitting apart as it spiraled into the atmosphere. Another warship took a direct hit to its engines, sending it crashing into the ocean with a deafening explosion. Admiral Vexen's expression darkened as he watched the unexpected retaliation. So, the insects wished to fight after all. "Deploy ground forces," he ordered. "Crush them." As the Dominion's dropped ships descended through the thick clouds, the Targari activated their most dangerous technology, the disruptor grid. Conceived in secret laboratories, this experimental defense network created unstable electromagnetic fields designed to scramble and disable enemy electronics. The moment the Dominion's troops hit the ground, the effects were immediate. Drop ships veered off course, slamming into buildings and mountainsides. Mechs and battle droids short-circuited, their systems overwhelmed by the unseen interference. Even the Dominion's personal combat armor flickered as energy pulses disrupted their power supplies. But the Targari weren't relying only on technology. They had warriors. The moment the Dominion's forces hit the ground, the Targari struck. From underground tunnels and hidden bunkers, Targari shock troopers emerged, their weapons primed and ready. Stealth teams infiltrated enemy positions, using advanced cloaking suits to move undetected. Within minutes, entire Dominion supply lines were severed, their command centers sabotaged. In the dense jungles, heavily armored Targari warriors ambushed Dominion troops, using the terrain to their advantage. Massive bioengineered war beasts, bred for battle, were unleashed, charging into enemy lines with terrifying speed and ferocity. Dominion soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. For the first time, the Dominion realized they were not fighting a primitive race. They were fighting a civilization that had been waiting for this moment. Admiral Vexen's frustration mounted as reports flooded in. Drop squads annihilated. Heavy armor disabled. Supply routes destroyed. "This is impossible," he growled, his mandibles clicking angrily. "They should be crumbling." Yet, against all odds, the Targari were holding their ground. More than that, they were winning. Realizing they needed a decisive strike, the Targari launched a bold counteroffensive. Their best pilots took to the skies in experimental stealth fighters, weaving through the Dominion's air patrols like shadows. Their target? The command ship of Admiral Vexen himself. The cloaked fighters slipped past the Dominion's defenses, unleashing a precision EMP blast directly at the flagship's bridge. Consoles exploded. Lights flickered. Entire sections of the ship lost power. For the first time in his career, Admiral Vexen felt fear. This isn't possible," he whispered as alarms blared around him. With the Dominion's command structure in disarray, the Targari forces pushed forward. Their warriors surged through the ruined cities, reclaiming lost ground. Every street, every bunker, every trench became a symbol of defiance. The Dominion, so certain of their superiority, found themselves being repelled. After days of brutal fighting, the unthinkable happened. The Dominion fleet began to retreat. As the last of the Dominion warships vanished into hyperspace, the people of Targari Prime stood victorious. Their cities lay in ruins, their losses were immeasurable, but their spirit remained unbroken. They had faced the greatest empire in the galaxy and had survived. Chancellor Kor stood before his people, bloodied but unbowed, and made a vow. "We have defied the Dominion," he declared. "We have shown them that we are not slaves. We are not weak. We are Targari. And today, we have begun something greater than a battle." He looked up at the sky, where the embers of war still glowed. "Today, we have started a revolution." The defeat at Targari Prime sent shockwaves through the galactic Dominion. For the first time in centuries, a world had successfully resisted their unstoppable war machine. What was supposed to be a swift and decisive conquest had turned into an embarrassment of galactic proportions. In the grand halls of the Dominion Council, the atmosphere was one of rage and disbelief. High-ranking officials, warlords, and strategists convened in an emergency meeting, their voices filled with fury. "This is unacceptable!" roared Overlord Carvos, the supreme ruler of the Dominion. His massive, armored form loomed over the chamber, his reptilian eyes burning with fury. "The Targari were nothing! A backwater species! And yet they have defied us! We must strike back with overwhelming force. We must remind the galaxy of our power!" Others, however, were more cautious. "The Targari were prepared for us," said General Vartel, one of the few commanders willing to acknowledge the truth. "They knew we were coming. Their technology was more advanced than we estimated. And their tactics, brilliant. We underestimated them." Carvos turned his gaze toward the general, his expression darkening. "Are you suggesting we are weak?" "No, Overlord," Vartel replied carefully. "I am suggesting we were arrogant." A murmur ran through the chamber. The Dominion had never lost a war. Never faced an opponent that didn't eventually kneel. And now, for the first time, they had been forced to retreat. But one thing was clear, the Dominion would not tolerate defiance. Overlord Carvos slammed his fist against the arm of his throne. "Then we will crush them properly. No more games. No more underestimations." He turned to his war council. "We will assemble the largest fleet in Dominion history. We will obliterate Targari Prime. And we will make an example of them so that no world dares to resist us again." The Council of Warlords immediately set their plans in motion. 50 dreadnoughts were ordered into battle readiness. Hundreds of cruisers, destroyers, and troop transports were mobilized. The most elite legions of Dominion warriors were assembled, including bio-enhanced shock troops and mechanized assault divisions. Special planetary bombardment weapons were prepared, devices capable of reducing entire continents to ash. The Dominion was not just going to retake Targari Prime. They were going to erase it. Meanwhile, on Targari Prime, the people knew the war was far from over. Chancellor Kor, still recovering from the last battle, stood before his advisors in the underground war chambers of the capital city. The holographic map above them displayed the intelligence reports they had gathered. The Dominion was coming back. In force. Our victory was only the beginning, Kor said grimly. Now we must prepare for a war unlike anything we have faced before. Targari scientists, engineers, and strategists worked around the clock to strengthen their defenses. The disruptor grid that had crippled the Dominion's forces was expanded, covering all major cities and key military installations. Hidden weapons platforms were constructed in deep space, designed to ambush the incoming fleet. A new tactical AI system was deployed, designed to counteract Dominion battle strategies in real time. Recruitment efforts surged. Every able-bodied Targari citizen was trained in combat, ready to defend their homeworld at any cost. But the most crucial development came from the scientists working in the secretive Division's 7 laboratories. They had been working on a weapon capable of turning the tide of the war. Deep beneath the surface of Targari Prime, in a facility hidden from even their own people, scientists unveiled Project Eclipse. At its core was a prototype energy destabilization cannon, designed to disrupt the very fabric of spacetime within a targeted area. If used correctly, it could shatter the cohesion of an entire fleet, causing ships to malfunction, collapse into themselves, or even vanish into the void of space. But it was untested. "This is dangerous," said Chief Engineer Lorik, his voice tense as he stood before the council. "The power output alone is beyond anything we have ever created. If something goes wrong, it could just as easily destroy us as it could the Dominion." Chancellor Kor looked at the schematics, his expression unreadable. "Do we have a choice?" No one answered. They all knew the truth. If the Dominion returned, conventional warfare would not be enough. Weeks passed. And then the sky darkened. The largest Dominion fleet ever assembled arrived above Targari Prime, blotting out the stars. The fleet was so vast that entire moons were shadowed by their presence. Admiral Vexen, his pride still wounded from the first defeat, stood aboard the Warbringer, the flagship of the Dominion's armada. "Let this be the last day of the Targari," he declared. "Begin the assault." The sky erupted. Dreadnoughts unleashed planetary bombardments, their cannons firing beams of energy powerful enough to crack mountains. Swarms of Dominion fighters rained down like a metallic storm, engaging Targari air and space forces in a brutal dogfight. But the Targari were ready. From the surface, hidden missile silos opened, launching salvos of plasma warheads toward the incoming Dominion vessels. The disruptor grid activated, causing entire squadrons of Dominion assault drones to malfunction mid-flight, crashing into the mountains below. Targari stealth ships, using experimental cloaking technology, slipped behind enemy lines, striking at the Dominion fleet's supply ships and command vessels. The battle was a storm of fire and destruction. Yet despite their best efforts, the Targari were still outnumbered and outgunned. As Dominion troops began landing on the surface, pushing through city defenses with relentless force, Chancellor Kor gave the order. "It's time. Activate Project Eclipse." Deep beneath the planet, the massive energy destabilization cannon hummed to life. The energy buildup was immense, causing the very ground to tremble. A singularity formed at its core, a swirling vortex of raw, chaotic energy. Then, with a deafening roar, it fired. A pulse of unimaginable power erupted from the planet, a cascading wave of disruption that rippled through space itself. The Dominion fleet froze. One by one, ships flickered, their systems going haywire. Some imploded, crushed under the weight of their own collapsed shields. Others vanished, lost to the void as the energy destabilization warped the space around them. Admiral Vexen watched in horror as his unstoppable fleet crumbled. "This isn't possible," he whispered. But it was. Targari Prime had done the impossible, again. As the remnants of the Dominion fleet fled, the people of Targari Prime stood victorious once more. But they knew this was not the end. The Dominion would never forgive this humiliation. The war was far from over. But now, for the first time in history, the galaxy saw a new possibility. Perhaps the Dominion was not invincible. Perhaps, for the first time in 1,000 years, it was the Dominion that feared rebellion. The crushing defeat at Targari Prime sent ripples across the galaxy. For centuries, the Galactic Dominion had ruled through fear, imposing its will upon weaker civilizations, ensuring obedience through sheer power. Now, for the first time in living memory, they had been defied and defeated. Throughout the Dominion's vast territories, whispers of rebellion began to spread. Once, the idea of resisting the Dominion had been unthinkable. Now, it had become a possibility. In the shadowed corridors of conquered worlds, resistance movements grew bolder. On occupied planets, where Dominion rule had long been absolute, underground factions began to organize. In secret, enslaved species plotted their liberation. The belief that had held the Dominion together for millennia, that they were unstoppable, had been shattered. The Dominion's supreme ruler, Overlord Carvos, could feel the tides turning against him. His warlords, once confident and assured of their power, were now divided. "We must act quickly," Warlord Vexen growled, still humiliated from his defeat at Targari Prime. "We must remind the galaxy of our strength. Any world that even thinks of rebellion must be eradicated." But not all agreed. "The harder we strike, the more enemies we create," said Councillor Malveth, one of the few voices of reason within the Dominion's ruling class. "The more we tighten our grip, the more worlds will slip through our fingers." Carvas scowled. "We will crush them before they become a true threat." And so, the Dominion prepared for war once more. On Targari Prime, Chancellor Kor knew their victory had set something in motion far beyond their world. The Dominion would never stop hunting them. But now, they were no longer alone. Across the galaxy, representatives from dozens of species, enslaved races, occupied worlds, even disillusioned members of the Dominion's own forces, began reaching out in secret. They had all seen the impossible happen. The Dominion had been defeated. The message was clear. If Targari Prime could resist, perhaps others could too. In a hidden meeting deep within the Targari capital, leaders from these disparate factions gathered in secrecy. Many had only ever known life under the Dominion's rule. Some had fought against each other in the past. But now, they were united by a common enemy. Among them were the Thalzar Syndicate, a group of rogue traders and smugglers who had long suffered under the Dominion's trade restrictions. The Kauri Resistance, an underground movement from the enslaved world of Keeler 7, where entire generations had been forced into labor. The Zorath Enclave, former Dominion scientists who had defected, bringing with them knowledge of the Empire's weaknesses. Captain Oren Vale, a former Dominion fleet commander who had abandoned his post after witnessing the brutal tactics of his superiors. Chancellor Kor stood before them, his voice steady. "The Dominion believes they rule through fear. They believe that because they have crushed every resistance before us, they will always be victorious. They believe that we will never unite against them." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every leader present. "They are wrong." A silence followed, one filled with determination. The seeds of rebellion had been planted. The newly formed rebel coalition knew that an all-out war against the Dominion would be suicide. They lacked the numbers, the firepower, the sheer scale of the Dominion's war machine. So they would fight differently. Instead of massive fleet battles, they would use hit-and-run tactics. Instead of direct confrontations, they would wage a war of sabotage and disruption. They would turn the Dominion's own tactics against them, striking at their supply lines, their communication networks, their chain of command. And most importantly, they would inspire others to rise. Their first target, the Dominion's fuel depot on Koran 5, a planet whose vast refineries supplied nearly one-third of the Dominion's fleet operations. Destroying it would cripple the Empire's war efforts. In the dark void of space, a small fleet of rebel ships, fast, agile, and heavily modified for guerrilla warfare, emerged from the shadows of a distant moon. On board the lead vessel, Captain Unveil stood at the command console. Once a Dominion officer, now a traitor to his former masters, he had one purpose. "Stay in formation," he ordered. "Hit them fast and hard. No mistakes." Below them, the Coran 5 refinery loomed, a massive industrial complex protected by Dominion defense platforms and an armada of automated drones. The attack began. Rebel ships weaved through enemy fire, dodging turret blasts and missile salvos. Fighters swooped in, targeting the main power stations with precise strikes. On the ground, rebel infiltrators, a mix of Khori freedom fighters and Zorith engineers, bypassed security systems and planted charges at critical weak points. Explosions rocked the facility. One by one, the Dominion defenses collapsed. Admiral Vexen, monitoring the battle from his command ship, roared in frustration. "These insurgents think they can defy us?" He ordered reinforcements to intercept the rebels. But by the time the Dominion fleet arrived, the refinery was in flames. The rebels had won. And across the galaxy, the flames of rebellion ignited. The attack on Coran 5 was a devastating blow to the Dominion. It was no longer just Targari Prime that resisted them, it was an entire movement. Overlord Carvos seethed with fury. "They dare challenge us?" he spat, slamming his fist into the war table. "They dare defy our rule?" He turned to his war council. "Find them. Crush them. Burn their worlds to ash." And so, the Dominion's response was swift and brutal. Entire cities were razed on suspected rebel planets. Innocent populations were rounded up, interrogated, and executed. Dominion intelligence operatives hunted for any sign of the rebellion's leadership. Spy networks and informants were deployed to infiltrate the ranks of the growing resistance. But instead of breaking the rebellion, these acts of brutality only fueled it. More and more planets, even those once loyal to the Dominion, began to question their allegiance. If the Dominion would burn entire cities just for suspected ties to the rebellion, then no one was safe. The galaxy stood on the edge of total war. On Targari Prime, the leaders of the rebellion gathered once more. The Dominion's retaliation had been worse than they imagined, but it had also proven something. "The Dominion fears us," Chancellor Kor said. "If they didn't, they wouldn't be this desperate." The assembled rebels, once scattered factions with no hope of standing alone, now stood together. The time for small victories was over. The time for war had begun. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Dominion was no longer the hunter. They were the hunted. The Dominion, once the unchallenged masters of the galaxy, had ruled with an iron grip for millennia. No species had ever truly threatened their dominance, until now. The Targari Rebellion, once a mere flicker of defiance, had grown into a full-scale war of resistance. Entire planets had risen against their overlords, and the once unshakable foundation of Dominion power had begun to crack. But the war was far from over. Overlord Carvos had unleashed his vast war machine upon the galaxy, determined to crush the rebellion before it could spread further. Planets suspected of harboring rebels were razed, entire populations forced into submission through fear and fire. Yet, instead of silencing dissent, these brutal tactics only fueled the flames of resistance. The Dominion's enemies multiplied with every atrocity committed. On Targari Prime, Chancellor Kor and his allies knew that time was running out. The Dominion would stop at nothing to reclaim their power. If the rebellion was to succeed, they needed to strike at the very heart of their enemy. The final battle was coming. In the depths of the rebel stronghold on Targari Prime, the coalition of free worlds met to plan their most daring operation yet, a direct assault on the Dominion's capital world, Drakthul Prime. No force had ever attempted such an attack. The Dominion homeworld was protected by fleets of warships, planetary shields, and an army bred for war. To break through their defenses, the rebels needed a strategy unlike any before. Their plan had three key objectives. Disrupt the Dominion's fleet. The Dominion's armada was too powerful to face head-on. Instead, rebel forces would use advanced hit-and-run tactics to lure key Dominion warships away from Drakthul Prime, leaving a gap in the planet's defenses. Sabotage from within. defectors from within the Dominion, once loyal officers who had grown disillusioned, would infiltrate the Dominion's command network. Their task was to disable planetary shields and defense grids at the crucial moment. Decapitate the leadership. Overlord Carvos and his war council were the heart of the Dominion's power. If they could be eliminated, the Empire would be thrown into chaos, unable to coordinate its remaining forces. It was a bold plan. A desperate one. But it was their only chance. As the rebel fleet surged toward Dominion space, their trap was sprung. Decoy attacks at key star systems forced the Dominion to divert entire battle groups away from their capital. By the time Carvos realized what was happening, it was too late. The rebels were already at his doorstep. The space battle that followed was the largest the galaxy had ever seen. Rebel cruisers and fighter squadrons clashed with Dominion dreadnoughts in a brutal, chaotic struggle. Explosions lit up the void as both sides suffered staggering losses. The rebels were outgunned, but they fought with desperation, using their speed and agility to outmaneuver the Dominion's larger, slower warships. As the battle raged in orbit, the infiltration teams on the ground executed their mission. Disguised as Dominion officers, they breached the planetary defense centers, hacking into control systems and shutting down the planet's shields. The moment the shields dropped, the second wave of the rebel attack commenced. Drop ships carrying elite strike teams descended upon the Dominion's capital city. Their target, Overlord Carvos himself. Within the Dominion citadel, Carvos stood at the heart of his empire, watching in disbelief as rebel soldiers stormed the streets of his capital. "This is impossible," he snarled, slamming his fist against the war table. "We are the Dominion! We do not fall!" But reality had already set in. His warlords were dead or in hiding. His fleets were in disarray. The fortress he had ruled from for centuries was crumbling around him. As rebel forces broke through the final defenses of the citadel, Carvos refused to surrender. With a roar of defiance, he drew his blade, determined to die in battle rather than face humiliation. It was Chancellor Kor himself who struck the final blow, standing face to face with the tyrant who had enslaved entire civilizations. Their battle was fierce, but in the end Carvos fell, the last overlord of the Dominion, slain by the rebellion he had sought to crush. His empire, built on fear and conquest, died with him. With Carvos gone, the remaining Dominion forces had no choice but to surrender. Across the galaxy, news of his death spread like wildfire. Worlds that had lived under Dominion rule for millennia erupted in celebration. The war was over. The Dominion, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, was no more. But victory came at a cost. Entire planets lay in ruins, civilizations forever scarred by the war. The rebellion had won, but now came the greatest challenge of all, rebuilding a shattered galaxy. In the months that followed, the leaders of the rebellion gathered to discuss the future. With the Dominion gone, what would take its place? Some feared that without a central power, chaos would reign. Others believed that freedom should not come at the cost of a new empire rising to take the Dominion's place. Chancellor Kor stood before the assembled leaders, his voice steady. "The Dominion ruled through fear. We must lead through unity. The mistakes of the past cannot be repeated." And so, the Galactic Council of Free Worlds was formed, a new governing body that would ensure no single power could ever again dominate the galaxy through oppression. It was not a perfect solution, nor an easy path forward. But it was a beginning. As the first meeting of the new council convened, the galaxy stood on the precipice of a new age. An age of freedom. An age of hope. An age where the memory of the Dominion would serve as a warning to future generations. Tyranny will always fall. And those who fight for freedom will always rise.